Thank you for turning to 10, your news leader. 10 News Conference with Gene Valicenti continues right now.
10 News Conference continues right now with Rhode Island tech businessman, data analyst, and former two-time candidate for governor Ken Block. I spoke with him about his new book called Disproven and the results of his voter fraud investigation.
The day after the election, I got a phone call on my cell phone from a guy I'd never heard of before, from a phone number I didn't recognize in D.C., and his name is Alex Cannon. He was a high-level attorney for the Trump campaign, and he got right to it and asked me if I would help the campaign look for voter fraud. Help. And I was pretty stunned by that. I hadn't been applying for the job. I hadn't made it known I was eager to do it. And I thought about it overnight and called him back and said, sure, I'll do it, but you have to know that in a decade of looking at voter data, I found nothing close to what I know you need to find. And also, I'm not promising you a result, you know. I mean,
what was the response to that?
He said that's what we want. We want an honest assessment of what's out there.
Is that what you got?
That's what they got. And what was really impressive about the whole thing is that Alex was truly doing his professional due diligence as a lawyer. And as I didn't find the fraud in the data that we were looking for, he began to ask me to assess claims of fraud that came in virtually from all over the world. And those claims ran the gamut from 100 dead people were voting in Pennsylvania as determined by a funeral homeowner, all the way to 700,000 people committed voter fraud together in Wisconsin by voting twice. All of those crossed my desk and many more, and they were all wrong, usually because the people who were looking at the data didn't understand what they were doing. They made some basic mistakes.
So all this data is coming into you. I mean, this is your field, data analytics, but how do you take all of this? Like, what was the process to boil it down to get to your conclusion?
Well, I mean, it depended on what the claim was. So what the work I was originally paid to do, which was to look to see if dead voters were voting in great numbers or if people were voting twice in great numbers. We found evidence of some dead voters, but not nearly enough to matter. We found evidence of a couple hundred duplicate votes across the swing states, not enough to matter. But then when we get into were zombie voters voting in Pennsylvania or the 700,000 voters in Wisconsin, that was just really different. I had to dig in and figure out where those claims went wrong, and I was able to do that every time.
All right, so when you got the results and you realized everything was pretty much legit, right? I'm simplifying this, but that's basically the headline. How did the Trump team respond to that?
All of my interactions with the Trump team were through Alex Cannon, and he did all of us a great favor at the time by keeping my participation anonymous. So no one above Alex understood that my company was doing the work, that I was attached to doing the work, to keep political pressures away from us so that we could do an honest assessment of everything that was happening. So Alex firmly believed that my findings were correct and accurate and true. He said so in his January 6th deposition, which I was watching on TV when they showed him
in Washington.
And I realized that my secret wasn't going to be a secret, because up to that point in time in 2022, virtually nobody knew I had done this work, including my in-laws. Once I saw Alex on TV, I was like, okay, I better get ready to talk about this and frame everything the proper way. I'm glad I didn't testify to the January 6th committee because they would have put their own spin on things. And it's important to tell the story neutrally and factually, which is what I've done in the book. And beyond that, I also discuss what I believe are truly necessary election reforms and how we can make our elections better and remove some of the sticky points that some folks grab a hold of and claim it's wrong, it's broken, it's all these different things. They're partially right, but there are things that are broken.
But it's not sweeping, is what you're saying,
not only
right?
It's not sweeping, there's no evidence that these things that aren't working as well as they should have led to massive fraud, or worse, an election that was fraudulent.
Now, when it comes to media coverage, we were talking before we went on the air, if you will, about who's picking up the story and who's not. What have you found?
What's been noticeably silent about my existence has been conservative media. Which is a problem, because really half the country believes the voter fraud narrative, but they're not being presented with contradictory facts that indicate why the voter fraud really wasn't a factor in the 2020 election. And most importantly, the real reason why Trump lost is really simple to put your head around. He didn't want the support of rhinos. He kicked rhinos out of his orbit, and rhinos didn't vote for him. And there's plenty of evidence, not just that I've uncovered, but that Trump's own pollster published and told him about in December of 2020, and that report is out on Politico.com. And Secretary of State Raffensperger in Georgia identified where Trump lost by 12,000 votes. He identified 30,000 votes where voters voted down-ticket Republicans but left the presidential selection blank. Those are the rhinos.
All right, so we're going into 2024 in the same matchup again. Are we going to hear these same claims again if he loses?
I think we've already been told we're going to hear the same claims again. I think that Trump's rhino problem remains, right? To win an election, you need a big tent, not an increasingly narrow tent. By the way, these elections are really squeaky close. If Trump had kept the rhinos on board in 2020, I'm very comfortable and confident saying he would have won that race, right? I mean, it was really this loss of conservative-leaning voters who chose not to vote, which was the determining factor in those races.
So for some people at home who are like, I cannot deal with this anymore, all of these claims, this book is still worth reading because
understanding what happened and why it happened is crucially important for everybody to know. But most importantly, I can't stand talking about 2020 at this point. I mean, everyone should be over it at this point.
Good luck with that.
But what's really important here is the reforms that I talk about, the changes that we want to make. I can already tell by talking to Democrats separately from Republicans, there's a lot of areas of agreement on making these changes.
What are those areas?
Well, so for example, I think that a lot of Democratic secretaries of state will tell me privately voter ID makes sense, right? Using signatures to verify who's voting is ancient, archaic, and inaccurate. If I wrote my name 20 times for you here as a signature,
look different,
it would look different every time.
So voter ID should exist.
100%. And on another one, we have a lot of states implement elections differently. And in a circumstance where a voter votes early but then dies before the election, whether that vote counts or not depends on where that voter lives. So in Rhode Island, the vote counts, even though Rhode Island doesn't have a law that says the vote should count.
Gotcha.
And Rhode Island's with a third of the states by not addressing the issue in law. Another third disallow the vote. The other third allow the vote.
So we have to make a decision one way or the other, right?
And what Congress needs to pass some laws that take these problems where we do things differently and make them standardized across the board. And it does matter in terms of the deceased voter voting before the election and then dying. Michigan, which disallows the vote, disallowed 3,500 of those votes in 2020. That's a lot of voters.
Especially if it's that tight, right?
Yeah, and it's unfair. Gerrymandering needs to go across the country because in a modern democracy, in the leading democracy in the world like we have, to allow elected partisans to tip elections by designing electoral maps that guarantee the party wins a seat every time leads to what we have in Congress now. Republicans, Democrats gerrymander as aggressively as the other side. 80% of the seats in Congress aren't competitive anymore. Competition is good, political competition is great, and we lack it. Right?
Interesting.
In Russia, Putin tips the balance of his democratic elections by killing his opponents. Right? Here, we allow partisan actors to effectively kill their opponents by designing election maps that those opponents can't ever win.
Did you plan on writing a book, or you were planning on just going through the data and delivering a report?
Right. My wife was very comfortable with me not talking about it. We literally hadn't told my in-laws about it until after the January 6 hearings. Very few people knew I had done the work. And we were happy to keep it that way, and I wasn't interested in talking about it. But some of my materials are part of the January 6th record. Alex Cannon was subpoenaed. He had to turn over documents. After all of that, I got subpoenaed by Jack Smith. I got subpoenaed by Ruby Freeman's legal team. I got subpoenaed by Fonnie Willis in Fulton County, Georgia.
So you wanted to put out there in your own words.
Well, all of my work is now part of the public record in these court cases. So it's even more important now to describe it accurately, dispassionately and factually about what it was, what it means, and then putting aside the 2020 thing, explaining what the loss was really all about, which was the loss of moderate Republican support. But the most important thing, again, is for everybody here is we can make our elections substantially better, and we really should.
There you have it.